Welcome to Generations at Work, where our goal is to build bridges, not walls, between the different generations in the workplace. Before we get started, if you're interested in learning more about how to lead different generations in the workplace, or perhaps you might want a workshop or coaching for your teams, you want to raise the leadership lid of your organization, please visit maxwellleadership.com/generations at work. And as a value add for all the listeners out there, we've created a downloadable free Generations at Work playbook that you can also access at maxwellleadership.com/generations at work. I'm your host, Susan Davis, and I have with me our generational expert, Dr. Tim Elmore. And Dr. Elmore, we have a special guest, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Will you please welcome and introduce our guest?
Absolutely. Thanks, Susan. We have David Yeager with us today. I have followed David's work for David, at least a decade. And I was so thrilled when your book came out this past year. I'm going to hold it up for people that can see it. But it's a book called 10 to 25, and we're going to talk about the emerging generation of young people and young adults today. So, David, thank you for joining us. I'm really thrilled that you're here. And I know you've been asked this question 1,000 times, but I'm going to ask it anyway for our listeners. What made you write this book?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me too. I think the reason why I focus on young people is just because that's honestly throughout my entire professional life all I've ever really thought about. I mean, I was a summer camp counselor. I ran youth programming in low income neighborhoods, and I was a teacher. And now I'm a coach, basketball, baseball, etc. And so I really just think all day about how to help adults do right by young people, whether they're parents or coaches or mentors or bosses or whatever. But why write the book? And we'd conducted a lot of research. Some of the work that I had launched early in my career was some of the first ever what we call a growth mindset intervention, which maybe we'll touch on that idea. But it showed some impressive results. It was very exciting. But the more I talked about that work, the more I realized I need to figure out how to coach people to more reliably and consistently in their relationships, help young people feel like they can grow and learn, help them develop a sense of resilience. And I kind of needed the book format to take it to the next step.
Yeah, that's good. Excellent.
Well, you have so many great points in this book, but I want to start with the neurobiological incompetence model. Tell us a little bit about what that model is, and then how does that show up today in this younger generation in the work environment?
Yeah, so the neurobiological incompetence model is my name for this just general idea that many people have encountered, which is that young people, their brains are underdeveloped, they lack a prefrontal cortex, their emotions hijack their rational decision making, and because of that, we can't really trust what they think or what their ideas are or how they plan to behave in the world. And of course, that model comes from some research on differences in the brain. There are absolutely some maturations that are happening across adolescence from the start of puberty and going sometimes even into the mid-20s. But that doesn't mean that young people are incapable of thinking rationally. And so when we hold this incompetence model, it's kind of like we tell ourselves, look, your dumb teenage brain can't do anything. And so my smart adult brain is going to do all the thinking. And so therefore my role is to just transmit all my smart adult brain thoughts into yours. And if, by the way, you, for whatever reason, don't immediately receive those without objection, then you're being irresponsible, short-sighted, rebellious, or whatever stereotype we have about young people. And I think that goes a little bit too far. And I think there's an alternative model that's based in research that we can look to instead.
Yeah, love it. In fact, that's where I want to camp out. So let me lead into that. What continues to shape the motivation of a young person? That was one of the most fun parts of the book for me. It was intuitive. I mean, we kind of know that's probably what we ought to do, but we don't do it. We assume they're incompetent. So at least until the mid 20s, they're motivated by some things. And I'd love for you to just talk about that.
Yeah. So I think a starting point is that what often looks like incompetence, like poor decision making from the perspective of adult rational actor models, often is just a different set of priorities. So,
Yeah.
what the neuroscientists I interviewed for the book like to say is that, saying that teenagers lack a prefrontal cortex means that they're incapable of carrying out goal directed behavior. But that's not the case. Teenagers are great at goal directed behavior. They're just good at goals that adults don't want them to be pursuing. Right. So
That's
if
right.
you want young people to be factoring trinomials on their worksheets all day, then it looks like they're not thinking. But if you want them to like sneak out of the house, right, or impress someone they have a crush on, they're very good at doing it. Like sneaking out of the house, they're like, all right, who do I have to lie to? They'll plan weeks in
Yeah.
advance. They want
Yeah.
a map of the sewers, and so it's not like they lack a prefrontal cortex. They deploy it selectively to different things that they care about, which then suggests, all right, well, what are the things that they care about? And
Yeah.
what I think the research is showing is that young people really, really care about experiences that elicit feelings of status and respect.
Yes.
And I don't mean a kind of trivial, like how many likes you get on your posts,
Yeah.
but more like the feeling that other people whose opinions you care about have concluded that you bring something of value to the table, that you are a
Yeah.
person of social worth, a person of value who contributes something, and therefore is deserving of a high status reputation. And that feels better in adolescence than it feels at any other age. And as a result, it's more motivating.
Yeah. That's good.
That's so good. It makes me think. I had a conversation just today with a coaching client, and they're like, I don't know how to handle this younger generation. I don't even know what to expect. So, how should our leaders or managers expect? What should they expect from today's younger generation of workers?
Yeah, I interviewed tons of managers for this book, and we're doing a bunch of projects now with service and retail
Hmm.
employers who are hiring teenagers and 20 somethings, and we're trying to reduce turnover and all those other kinds of
Yeah.
things. The kind of complaints I hear are things like,
Hmm.
um, we have some procedure that people need to follow, and then I tell them to change it because it's a safety issue or an efficiency issue. And then the young person is like, stop yelling at me. And then the manager's like, what are you talking about? I'm telling you to do your job. And then the young person's like, you're just yelling at me left and right. I don't want to work here. And then it becomes a whole quiet quitting or a silent rebellion
Yeah.
situation. And older generations can't believe what's happening. They're like, this
Yeah.
makes no sense because
Yeah.
when I was a kid, I just did what my boss told me.
Hmm.
And there's a lot going on there, but just to unpack it for a second, um,
Hmm.
I think, first of all, that many of us overestimate how much we did everything our bosses told us to do immediately with no
That's right. I think you're
rebellion.
right.
We
Yeah.
Um,
forget.
and so we got a little bit of rose-colored glasses about our own youthful indiscretions.
Yeah.
But also, our generation and older generations, we were raised to believe that in general, you're supposed to hate your job until you're like 35.
Yeah.
And you're just supposed to, if it's bad, you're supposed to suck it up, and your compensation is your pay or the prospect of a promotion in your mid to late 30s, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so, and I think that if someone would have told us 20 or 30 years ago that you could feel meaning and fulfillment in your job in your 20s, we would have been like, yes, that's what I want. Absolutely. So I'm not sure that this younger generation is more entitled. They want what we would have wanted. They
Yeah.
just realize now that it's an option, and the
Yeah.
toothpaste is out of the tube a little bit and you can't put it back
Yeah.
in. But I'm not sure that's as much a flaw in this generation as much as it is, I don't know, maybe we put up with some things we shouldn't have put up with in the 80s and
Yeah.
90s.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And,
think
and
you're
I
right.
and I hear that. I hear that, oh, they're so entitled. Just today, I was with a client and they said, oh, well, I'm Gen X and we just figured it out. Why does this young generation, why can't they just do it? And so I think, I mean, the older generations are expecting something that's not expect that you can't expect anymore.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think that,
Mm.
one one thought is if a manager just has very high expectations and gives you a hard task and they're like, go figure it out and don't whine, don't complain, just go do it. Um, there's a subset of employees now and in the past who would do that. And then that subset is like your overperformers, and then everybody else is like your underperformer. Um, but like, why would you set it up that way? Like that'd be like a professor who on the first day of organic chemistry is like, all right, here's the exam, go figure it out. And guess what? I bet 5% of college students would be able to ace that exam with the teacher doing literally nothing. They could go read the book and Google stuff and find lectures and they could figure it out. Does that make you a good teacher? Because it feels like in that scenario, you just proved that you're useless as a teacher and that all you did was give a test. Like a good teacher would get 100% of people up to the level where they mastered organic chemistry. So why is a good manager one that creates impossible tasks, 100% delegates them, provides no support, and then all they do is just select the employees who could have done anything in the absence of your management? And like that's not, for me, the model of an ideal manager.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I want to focus on something you just said earlier, David, and have you elaborate. You mentioned back in the day, just do what I tell you to do, that sort of thing. And I think you also insinuated that may not have been good leadership even back in the day. I want to focus on the importance of relationship. In one of my focus groups recently, I said to some Gen Zers, a lot of hiring managers are saying you just don't care about your job. And one Gen Zer spoke up and said, well, I'm thinking you don't care about me. Mm-hmm. So the volley was not, you're wrong, but if I don't see any care toward me, I have a hard time volleying it back. I think this, I'm going to tell you what I think, and you tell me if I'm wrong. I feel like we underestimate the power of actually cultivating a relationship with that young employee or student. Would you comment on that, and maybe from science?
Yeah, I think that the science is interesting. So if you want to predict things like burnout, quitting, underperformance, management research, a lot of people show this, suggests that one of the best things to measure is stuff like psychological safety, authenticity. In general, not every time, but in general, those studies work best when you administer items that are negatively framed. Like, I have to hide who I truly am and what I truly care about from everyone at work. Okay. Or the only way to be successful at my job is for me to be a phony and pretend to be somebody different. Okay. If you say yes to that, turns out work is exhausting and it's a slog and you're more likely to do the minimum. Okay. Now, where a lot of management research, I think, and I think those findings are valid. I don't have any problem with those findings. Where I think a lot of management research has gone wrong is to take those findings and then look at the opposite, which is, therefore every workplace needs to be like a talent show to bring out your individual identity every day. And I want your desk decorated with all of your trophies from middle school. And I need to personally know who your pen pal was in 5th grade. And I think that's a bit like what happened in the 80s with the self-esteem movement, where if you look back at the original self-esteem research, the items that predicted all kinds of bad stuff were things like, I am not a person of worth and no one cares if I live or die. That's low self-esteem. That's what it means. If you agree to that, it's really bad, But the way to fix that isn't to give you a trophy for everything. Right. The way to fix it is to give you authentic accomplishment. And similarly, I think in the workplace, when I hear relationships, it is true. It's 100% true. But the wrong version of it is you need to have a separate handshake for every person as they come into the office and play their favorite music during the break time or whatever. I think the more authentic version is that you as the manager are taking them seriously as a person who can contribute to the success of the group, and that by making that contribution, they are earning a meaningful reputation that you, the manager, will not forget, and that will pay off for them in the sense of further promotions or greater responsibility, a great reputation, letters of recommendation, whatever it is.
Mhm.
It's like I'm invested in you as a person who is growing and developing and who can do something great. And I think that if you answer that question in someone's mind, like, am I a discardable piece of garbage, or am I a valuable person who's being invested in order to improve my own skills and the skills of the organization?
Yeah.
If you answer that question to people's minds in the affirmative, they're willing to do all kinds of stuff that's uncomfortable and unpleasant. And you'll have Gen Z employees that might even work harder than people in the 80s
Yeah.
and 90s did, because you've tapped into what they truly care about, which is their trajectory in life.
Yeah. That's good.
That's so good. It's just when you feel valued and valuable, you show up differently.
Totally. And there are tons of employers that do this really well. Like in my book, I write about the best grocery store manager in Norway. His name is Ule, and he's unbelievable. He does this kind of stuff. Someone to be 3 levels down below a manager, but he's just planning on later sending them to manager pre-training, and they're already super invested in the workplace. And there are places in the US that do this too, like Wegmans is a really good example. And interesting, like In-N-Out Burger is like another one that invests in their people.
Yeah. Yeah.
With the corporations and the groups that I work with, it's one of the things I try to tell them all the time is you've got to invest on the front end in order to get the results on the back end. And I hear often, I just don't have time. We're so busy, we don't have time. And I usually say, well, you don't have time not to, right? Because that investment in that young person is going to yield high return.
The time thing is probably the number one complaint that I heard when I was piloting my book, because I had a bunch of people read it before I published it. And they're like, "What? I'm an individual contributor. I don't have time to hold someone's hand, to do feelings, to be mentoring them or whatever."
Yeah.
And my answer is similar to yours, which is that, like, let's start with your dream of what your team looks like. How does it function? And it's probably people who proactively do what you want them to do without you having to nag them and check in on them every morning. And they only come to you when they're appropriately stuck, and they don't go off in some direction that's a waste of time. They check with you before they do that. But in general, they're working independently and in a motivated way. If that's your team, you save so much time. And the only way to get that is to have people that are motivated by the status and respect that they're going to get from having done a good job and get earned impressive reputation.
Fair. That's so important. You just mentioned nagging, which makes me think of the parent nagging study. Now, this was fascinating to me. I want you to explain the parent nagging study, but the science behind it and why it's so important when we're communicating to these younger team members.
If you start from this neurobiological incompetence model, right, that like I'm the smart one, you're the dumb one, I just need to transfer my expertise to you, then we adopt an unwise communication style. And that communication style is nagging, or what in the book I call grown-splaining. And I'm now going to mansplain grown-splaining to you. And it's just the idea that I'm going to transmit all my smart adult thoughts to your dumb young brain. And it's kind of like how Americans communicate in foreign countries when they don't speak the language. They just yell English louder. They're like, "Where's the Eiffel Tower?" And like that doesn't work, right? And so some wonderful researchers, I wasn't involved in this, but I love this study, asked what happens in the teenage brain when you're being nagged. And in this study, they had moms pre-record themselves nagging, in this case, teenage daughters, could have been sons, could have been dads. And then they bring the teenagers in they're in the fMRI machine. So there's a magnet whirring around their head, detecting blood flow in different regions. And meanwhile, they're listening on their headphones to their mom nag them for like not taking their shoes downstairs or being mean to their sibling. And I'll tell you what happened 0% of the time. What never happened was teenagers listened to the nagging and were like, Mom, you have a point. I'm really glad you raised all these issues. And so I'm going to change everything. I've already made a plan, actually, and I'll get back to you. So good chat. So that never happened. Instead, what you see is teenagers who are angry. So you see the affective regions of the brain light up, and then you see a decrease in cognitive control. So that's like dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the region related to planning ahead. And then you see also a decrease in social cognition. So whether young people are inferring what the adults speaking to them really mean. And that's important because if you want to have those like independent workers who go off and do what you intended, not what you literally said, right? If you want them to read between the lines without needing everything spelled out, they need social cognition. They need to be mind reading a little bit.
Yeah.
And that part of the brain gets shut off. It's like a nagging induced frontal lobotomy that happens. And we have no one to blame but ourselves for our own communication styles.
Yeah, yeah, so true. So true. So, David, we want to wrap up this particular conversation with some very practical takeaways. In your book, you talk actually more than once, I think, about the power of our words and the way we communicate. The listeners right now are probably parents, but they're certainly managers at work, coaches, perhaps. Give us some practical insight on the power of our words.
Sure. Let me give you a couple examples. So one is when I was following this grocery store manager, he would walk the floor every morning and talk to people, but he never talked to people 2 levels below about their jobs. He talked to them about their lives. So small changes where you might think, oh, I'm showing concern and care for your job by asking you, hey, how was the pickup on aisle 9 yesterday? Or how many people did you get through the self-checkout? He's like, I would never do that because it looks like I'm micromanaging and therefore I don't trust them. Yeah. And so he's very attuned to misinterpretations of his intentions. And so he's like putting things in the relationship piggy bank. And then I talked to a direct report who had kind of learned how to goof off from an older employee who had later left the company. She learned basically how to hide in the break room and not do any work. And so he brought her in and kind of chewed her out. And it was very tough. And I asked her about it. I was like, did you want to quit? Were you mad? And she said, no. The first thing he said to me is, I care about you too much to let you have poor performance. I'm too invested in your future. Yeah. And I would be lying to myself if I wasn't honest with you. Yeah. And so little things like that, I've learned I have to say that to my 9-year-old when I'm coaching in baseball. Yeah. Like he's like, Dad, stop complaining about my swing. I'm like, I care about you too much to let you go to a tournament and strike out 5 times. Like I want you to hit the ball. It's too fun. Yeah. And so I have to tell you how to do this. And so it's really like authentic relationships. It's transparency about what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And the other big thing is asking way more questions than we tell. Often we're in a hurry. We know the right way to do the task because sometimes it's a task we used to do and now we're delegating it. And it's very easy for us to be like, this is easy, just do this. Yeah. Well, guess what? If they don't know how to do it, it's not easy. And that's an insulting thing to say. Mm-hmm. So instead saying, show me what you've tried so far, what has worked and what hasn't worked, and what's making you stuck. And say that curiously. Yeah. Then people are like, oh, okay, now let's troubleshoot. And that works wonders.
Love it.
Wow, amazing. Great conversation. We so appreciate you being here. Thank you, Dr. Yeager, for being here today on the Generations at Work podcast. Dr. Elmore, as always. Again, if you're interested in learning more about how to lead different generations in the workplace, or perhaps you need coaching, you need a workshop in your organization to raise your leadership lid, contact maxwellleadership.com/generations at work. You can also visit that to download your free Generations at Work playbook. And that's all for this episode. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you.